Hey everyone, it's Jordan from Fishkeeping Made Easy, and today I'm going to talk about my experience of going from freshwater to saltwater. So first off, let me say I actually found it a lot easier than I expected to keep marines. There was quite a lot of advice that I took from people, but there was also advice that I didn't take from people, and I'll share that later on. So here's some advice, tips and tricks on my experience in keeping a Nano Reef tank. So I think the best place to start is with the saltwater itself. So I think the water itself is a big worry for a lot of people, but let me just make it simple to start with. You can buy it ready-made from your local fish shop. Or you can simply buy salt water and mix it with RO water in a bucket. The packets of salt themselves will have information on it on how to get the desired level of salt that you want, but I wouldn't worry too much. It's not a perfect science. If you don't have enough salt, then you just add some more salt. If you have too much salt, you just add some more RO water. I think the only tricky part, and I think where a lot of people go wrong, is when water starts to evaporate, especially when you have a tank that doesn't have a lid. What you need to remember is that when the water evaporates, the salt content will stay the same. Therefore, the salinity will also rise. So just like when you're mixing your salt, when you've got too much salt, you have to add some RO water to top it off perfectly. Now, I would recommend just getting an auto top-up system, but because I've just got a little nano tank, I decided that I didn't really need it. Now, you will need to get a refractometer, as this is the only way you can really measure the salinity. Now, you can get different versions of them. You can get electronic ones, but I just kind of have this manual one. You basically just put a couple of drops of water on it and it will measure the salinity for you. So I think the next thing is corals. Now, I think we're fed this idea that corals are like these impossible things to look after and that they need these precise water conditions and only professionals can really do it. And that might be the case for some corals, but it's definitely not the case for all of them. Now, I have to say I'm very surprised on how easy it's been keeping the corals that I've currently got. The coral you can see here is a leather toadstool. Now, I would recommend this for anybody who wants to keep corals and have sort of a large coral that's got a bit of a presence to it. It's not the prettiest coral under the blue light, but it definitely looks quite decent under normal light. Now, these corals you can see here I would refer to as the Anubias and Java ferns of the saltwater world. And a lot of them still look really good under the blue light. Here's a couple clips from my phone. Now, I have a trace element supplement that I put in, and I also put in phytoplankton. Other than that, I really haven't done anything. Now, your water changes are a little bit different when it comes to marines, because what it does is it replenishes a lot of the stuff that the corals need. So basically, small regular water changes also help with corals. I wouldn't do a very large water change like you might do sort of 50-60% in a freshwater tank, as it might change the conditions far too quickly for them. So continuing on from water changes, I think the next thing a lot of people seem to worry about is water parameters themselves. Now, I don't think saltwater tanks are really any different from freshwater tanks when it comes to poor water quality. They're all caused by the same thing, and that being not enough water changes, overfeeding, and basically just not paying attention to the tank. Now, in marines, they do tend to use cleanup crews, and I would recommend these just for the rock itself, as there's little bits in the rock that you can't really get to that a lot of these little things can get to. A little mix of shrimp, crabs and snails, but just make sure they are compatible, as that's one thing about marines, is there are a lot of things that can't go together. So really all you want to do is to apply the same principles and practices that you have in freshwater, and these will work well in saltwater too. Next is equipment. Again, I think a lot of people think you need this fancy equipment in order to successfully run a marine tank. Again, if you can afford this, I would go with it, as it will just make your life a little bit easier, but it's not essential. So in this little nano tank here, I've basically just got the same filter and heater that you would in a freshwater nano tank. Again, the light can be used in freshwater or marine and is pretty cheap, to be fair. And the tank was also very cheap. I think it was only about £20 odd. What I'll do is I'll link everything in an Amazon link at the bottom so you can check it out for yourself. Now, obviously, I've only got a little nano tank, but I've still had people saying to me things like, oh, have you got a protein skimmer? Have you got a sump? For these smaller tanks, these kind of things aren't really essential. They will help and make your life easier, but if you really understand the basics of how to keep fish and you don't overfeed and you do regular water changes, I wouldn't worry too much about not having them. I basically added some macro algae to the right hand side of my tank to help with nitrates, so it was like having a tiny little section of a sump. So finally, my advice on what fish to keep. Now, I'll keep this simple. Do your research. A lot of marine fish grow gigantic, a lot of marine fish will eat corals, a lot of marine fish will just be super aggressive towards anything, so the best thing you can do is to do your research. Don't just turn up at the shop and buy a fish because you like it. Some of them will be basically wolves in sheep's clothing. Now, there's loads of other tips and tricks I can give you. I'll make another video if people are interested in it. I didn't want to make this one too long, but thanks again for watching. Please subscribe and like the video, and follow us on Instagram at FishKeepingMadeEasy. Thank you.